How nice to see you all joining. This is like the best party I've been to in ages. How lovely to see all of these familiar faces. And how gorgeous of you to all be very sensible and staying on mute. I'm just going to take it that you're saying hello.
If it's the best party you've been to in ages, what were the others like?
Also on Zoom for the last little while, I have to say.
I think it's more than a last little while. I think it's been forever.
It feels that way, but we're coming out the other end. So there's still a few people coming in, but I do want to start. So firstly, can I just say hello and welcome to Evolution, the 2020 annual Genderwise event that marks the transition of and the evolution of the Australian Women Donors Network. I'm Julie Riley, and I really want to thank each of you for being with us today as we celebrate our first chapter. We reveal our new name and brand identity, and most importantly, present a really compelling conversation on the important issue of a gender lens on philanthropy. I want to begin by warmly paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that I'm joining you from, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I want to thank them for their care of this land for the last 60,000 years and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I extend that acknowledgement and respect to the elders and custodians of all the lands from which all of you are joining around the country today. I think in this year of racial reckoning, it's important to remember sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So I'm thrilled to note that we have 230 registrants for today. So I know there's a budget happening in Victoria, but clearly not the hot ticket in town. So thanks for being with us. It is the last official event for the Women Donors Network. And I want to just say thank you to those, many of you who sent us love when you registered, but also those of you who very kindly and generously made donations to support our work. So thank you. I want to acknowledge some special guests who are joining us today. We have Dr. Andrew Lee, the Shadow Treasurer for, the Shadow Minister for Treasury and Charities, Katie Allen, the member for Higgins. I want to welcome Natasha Stott-Despoja and congratulate her on her recent appointment to the UN's Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Violence Against Women. And there's so many lovely warm nods, Natasha. I wish you could see them all. And it's a timely reminder that the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence starts tomorrow. I also want to acknowledge Kate Jenkins, our fabulous Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner. So we're honoured to have all of you with us today, and we also want to welcome all of our wonderful supporters and donors. So please open your chat boxes. We're really interested to have an interactive conversation. We want to see your comments, reactions, questions, particularly when we get to the conversation. But we do ask that you follow the usual protocols and stay on mute until we kick off. Bless you, Lisha. I just saw that sneeze. So today has three parts. Part one is a celebration of our impact over the first chapter. The centrepiece is a compelling conversation about that really critical issue to gender equality, early childhood. And it's going to be important not just for children, but for the economic recovery of our country. In part three, we'll officially launch our new website and outline the path going forward. So it's no coincidence that today is Evolution Day. It's a very apt theme for the day. And it's one of the reasons we're always interested in evolving, doing better, striving for more impact. It's one of the reasons that we have in fact made this decision to rebrand. So to share a little history, I want to welcome the co-chair of Philanthropy Australia, She's also a former staff member of Women Donors and a former board member, and she happens to be a very dear friend. Amanda kindly agreed to step in to cover for Jill Reichstein, our Deputy Chair and co-founder, who unfortunately had a very unhappy encounter with a filing drawer cabinet and has had to go to hospital for some work on her shin. So she sends her apologies and love, but I'll please welcome Amanda to start us off with some storytelling.
Thanks, Julie. It's my pleasure, as Julie said, as a former staff member and board director of Women Donors, to be invited to share with you the story of the Australian Women Donors Network so far and to celebrate its impact over the last decade. For some of you who've been with Women Donors along the way, it will be a reminder. For others, an introduction and potted history of the work that has led to this next strategic step the network is taking today in its evolution. The story starts around 2009. There were a number of leading women in philanthropy who felt strongly about supporting women and striving for gender justice by funding women's organisations and projects. So when Eve Marlab suggested to Jill Reichstein that they do something to encourage and support more women to get involved in giving, they knew that there was a huge need. And across the world, momentum was building with the establishment of groups like the US-based Women Moving Millions, who teamed up with the Women's Funding Network in the US to launch a global movement to grow bolder giving with a gender lens. Eve and Jill pulled together a small ginger group that met to discuss how they would grow a focus on women in philanthropy, and it quickly mushroomed. Shortly afterwards, they formally established the Australian Women Donors Network with the help of Arnold Bloch-Liebler and appointed the inaugural part-time CEO. Over the following 10 years, the network has achieved a lot with a little, and I'm proud to have played a very small part in this story. With a mission to inform, inspire and enable greater investment in women and girls, the Australian Women Donors Network has systematically made the business case for gender-based giving. They commissioned the first research that mapped Australia's philanthropic investment in women and girls and established an information hub on gender issues, including an online project showcase to help connect funders to impactful projects that would support women, whether in homelessness, the arts, education, disaster recovery, mental health, and so on. They brought leading philanthropists to Australia, starting with Tracy Gary, the author of Giving While Living, and have since staged annual Genderwise events presenting global thought leaders to share their knowledge and inspiration with the Australian philanthropic sector about what can be achieved when you invest in women and girls. International guest speakers have included the founder of Women Moving Millions, Helen LaKelly Hunt, Christine Graham, and the brilliant documentary filmmaker Abigail Disney, whose visit at the time firmly established the network on the Australian philanthropic landscape.
Amanda, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 minute, if you don't mind. There is, I think, quite a lot of broadband or bandwidth taken up by this. I wonder if people could turn their own videos off just for this presentation, and then we'll welcome you back. I think it will make a lot of sense. Thanks for that. Sorry to interrupt, Amanda.
No problem. So the message they shared had a universal thread. Investing in women has a multiplier effect across society. Women's talents, skills and abilities help build nations, industries, communities and families thrive and grow. And philanthropy has a role to play in removing barriers that keep women from reaching their full potential. Founding board member Mary Crooks created and conducted a series of gender lens workshops, and the network then built on this approach, exploring the concept of unconscious bias in decision making. Women donors, there was a rising interest in collective giving. We understood that many women outside formal philanthropy also wanted to help women, and they could best do so by pooling their funds. So we staged a national tour with Colleen Willoughby, the mother of giving circles in the US, to help grow the collective giving movement in Australia. Colleen's visit helped to seed new giving circles around the country, including the Melbourne Women's Fund, Women for Change in Brisbane, and later Womankind in Sydney, as well as strengthening existing giving circles like 100 Women in Perth and Impact 100 groups. The Melbourne Women's Fund now has more than 130 members and has granted over $700,000, propelling numerous charities along their path to impact and taking others from strength to strength. It's also a vital training ground for emerging philanthropists. It was always clear, of course, that growing women's giving alone was not enough. The second strand of the strategy involved working with trusts and foundations across the philanthropic sector. Over the years, the network has consulted with leaders in the sector and produced practical resources in response to their needs, including the Genderwise Guide to Philanthropy, the Toolkit for Genderwise Grant Makers, guidelines for grant seekers, as well as numerous fact sheets to help funders understand and address areas of gender inequality where they want to make a difference. They also developed board presentations and gender-wise workshops to encourage all levels of the philanthropic sector to incorporate a gender lens across their formal processes. The network continued to present high-profile speakers, including philanthropic fathers and daughters, to hear from the father of Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai about how men can help ensure a more gender-equal world. And last year worked with Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, to explore philanthropy's role in supporting global grassroots movements for gender equality. In addition, they've partnered with Philanthropy Australia Genderwise Philanthropy. Last week presented the fifth such award to the Brian and Virginia McNamee Foundation for its support of Victorian-based Wire and the Purse Project, which helps women affected by family violence to gain control of their finances. The fact that this project influenced the Royal Commission into Family Violence and has since been picked up by government shows the power of philanthropy to drive real change. Also in partnership with Philanthropy Australia, the network established a Women and Girls Funders Group to deep dive into key issues for women, such as sex and gender in medical research, mental health for women across the life cycle, and to engage with gender equality experts, including our Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, who's with us on the call today. The network has worked to embed a gender lens questions in grants management software like Smarty Grants, taught philanthropy students at Swinburne Centre for Social Impact, and established information sessions for women's non-profit leaders to help them navigate funding. And this work to help refine taxonomies and improve measurement and gender data in the philanthropic and charitable sector, connecting, collaborating and tirelessly advocating for a focus on women and girls at philanthropic roundtables, gatherings and discussions. I don't think I've been to even one event focused on women and girls or focused on philanthropy where Julie has not asked a pointed question around gender equality. You're the ultimate ambassador, Julie.
Thank you.
Over the years, it's been pleasing to see the growing number of philanthropists who've joined Women Moving Millions or have separately provided significant funding for women and girls. And I'm happy to say that that includes not only a leading group of women, but also a number of men, experienced and award-winning philanthropists like Paul Wilton and Ian Darling. So I think it's really important to come back to why this work matters. Around the world, women face discrimination and violence and are held back in so many ways, limiting their well-being, that of their family, community, the peace, security and prosperity of their nation. Here in Australia, despite significant progress, women and girls continue to face challenges and barriers to equality. When it comes to safety, economic security and political representation, Australian women and girls are clearly not yet equal. Last summer's bushfires and the current COVID pandemic have further exacerbated these inequalities. As we see it, the increased awareness and media focus on gendered impacts have amplified the need for a gender lens on philanthropic responses and made the important work of supporting gender lens funding more important than ever. Today, we celebrate and thank those early adopters of genders like Catherine Brown Foundation and Katrina Fay at Perpetual, whose intelligent leadership has placed gender equity at the centre of grant making, and leading businesswomen like Jo Horgan of Mecca, who has backed women donors from the early days and grown her own company's giving to generously support the education of girls locally and globally. And founding board member Carol Schwartz, who last week was recognised as the 2020 leading philanthropist and celebrated for bringing her skills, resources and influence to advance gender equality. Over the years, the Women Donors Network has benefited from the service of a wonderful range of board directors, staff and volunteers, and we acknowledge and thank them all, and in particular, former chair and ongoing supporter and champion for women and girls, Deanne Weir, and of course, the wonderful current chair, Sam Mostyn, who we'll hear from shortly. Thank you, Julie and the board, for allowing me to share on behalf of Jill some of the highlights of this important first chapter. It's been a delight for me in this story of impact. Heartening to see that what began as a small but mighty group of women has steadily grown in influence and impact to be such an important part of the Australian philanthropic sector. And today, the network will take a significant step to ensure it is well positioned to do even more. Thanks to each and every donor and supporter that has walked alongside the network and supported its very important first decade. And to every funder who has started to ask the question, how will this initiative impact women and girls? I'll now hand back to Julie to reveal the new brand and to introduce our brilliant speakers for today.
Amanda, thank you very much for that, not just for stepping in at the last minute, but also just for being such an awesome part of philanthropy and such a great leader. I'm really sorry, I apologise to people. I know there was a bit of breakup on the voice, but we have those words and we'll publish them on our new website. So now it is with great respect to all of those people who brought us to the chapter that we are up to today and are about to farewell, those giants whose shoulders we stand on. I want to thank them very much for the last 10 years. We're about to reveal our new name and visual brand, and I'm a little bit nervous but very excited. It's really in many ways the same mission, the same focus. Our absolute drive and commitment has not changed. So you might wonder, why are we changing our name? I think there are many among you who have suggested it's not really describing who we are, what we do, and what our target audience really is. So like any good organisational development, we've really been driven and led by strategy and our broadened ambitions. So we're about to click through and show you the next slide. And I want you to please jump into the chat and, oh, I missed that one, sorry. One of the reasons that, I just need to go back. Sorry, one of the reasons is that we've realised, of course, that there is a huge market, probably 3 times the size of private giving in the corporate market. And we have a number of bodies that are standing up for gender equality in what they do every day. John McLeod, thank you for your great analysis that tells us that this is actually a very big pool. And so we've started collaborating with the Male Champions of Change on a framework that will help them to align their desires and commitment to gender equality by applying a gender lens to their giving. So here we go, the big reveal. I think somebody should do a drum roll, but here we are. It is because it is not just up to women to fund women's inequality. It's up to all of us, corporates, institutional funders, private philanthropists. So we are now embracing all Australians investing in women. Empowering giving for a fairer future is our tagline, which I think makes complete sense. So we hope that you agree. I can talk a little bit more about the brand later, but I'm really anxious to get to our conversation. But for me, the circle or the red dot or the target really sums up bringing in all of the community and embracing everyone into this circle and accepting it's everyone's not just responsibility, but delight to drive that change with their funding. So we look forward to your comments and are very excited for this next big step in our evolution. I want to really sincerely thank Vedran Drakulic and Gandil Philanthropy, whose grant enabled us to go through this rebrand process, and all who were involved in it. There were so many stakeholders who generously gave their time and their feedback, and it's really because of your contribution that we've arrived at this outcome. So thank you very much. A little later, we will launch our website and invite you into that. That's been funded by the Collier Foundation. But again, these things could not happen without your great support. So now for the main event. We're extremely fortunate to have with us today the former Premier of South Australia, who leads the Thrive by 5 initiative for the Minderoo Foundation, Jay Weatherill. I've only just got to meet Jay in the last few days leading up to this, and I have to say he's absolutely a delight and clearly very passionate about the issue of early childhood development, and has exceptional policy and political skills to bring to that cause. So thank you, Jay. We're very pleased to have you. Sam Mostyn is, for most of you who know, a highly respected corporate chair and non-executive director who generously shares her superpowers with the not-for-profit sector and chairs a number of boards, including Australians Investing in Women. So I have to get used to saying that, I love it. And has recently been appointed as President of Chief Executive Women. Anyone who knows Sam is a massive fan, so if you don't know her, I'm sure you will be a massive fan shortly. And that also applies to our moderator today, Catherine Fox. Catherine's well known as a Walkley Award-winning journalist, author, and a highly effective advocate for gender equality. When Catherine launched our Genderwise toolkit some years ago, I think she didn't realise that that was the beginning of me pursuing her relentlessly until she joined our board, and you will see why. Not only is she a board director of Australians Investing in Women, but she is the co-founder of the Sydney Women's Giving Circle. So those of you in Sydney who have not yet joined that group, please, after this, go onto our website and we will connect you to it. So Catherine, I'll hand over to you now to lead the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Julie, and to everyone for joining us, and to all the team at Australians Investing in Women. What a lovely thing to say. Having been intimately involved, indeed, as we all have in coming to this branding, I think anyone who's been involved in anything like this exercise knows at the end it looks incredibly simple, but the amount of input is extraordinary. But what a wonderful outcome, and we're so pleased. And Julie, the responses already are very encouraging. So thank you so much for that. We're very happy with it. And in fact, I was reminiscing as we looked through the retrospective, Julie, I think that I first came to get to know you when I interviewed Abigail Disney, many years ago when I was still at the Financial Review, and what an impressive woman, and got to know about your work. But really lovely to have the new branding. Now, of course, much to discuss today about the gender lens and its use in philanthropy and why that's so important, and against a backdrop that we've already seen a little bit about what challenges for women there are, especially at the moment, around employment, unpaid work levels, domestic violence, and so on. And I read just in the last few days, something like 20,000 less women at the middle of this year were in higher education than at the same time in 2019. Such worrying implications. However, along with eternal vigilance, my bywords are always eternal optimism. And I wouldn't be still in my rather battle-scarred way going on about these issues if I didn't believe that we could genuinely make a change, which of course is one of the reasons I am on this board. So today's conversation, we will of course touch on a number of these issues. I did want to just mention, and it may well come up as we discuss, one of the books that we highly recommend if you are interested in learning a little bit more about why a gender lens is absolutely fundamental is a book called Invisible Women. Some of you may well have read it or heard of it, and thoroughly suggest that you do have a look at it. The English author who's won prizes from here to beyond for this wonderful work looks at how the world has been designed in so many ways around a male default, and that if we really want to change things, we have to look at a world that actually is about everyone. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we have heard that, I'm sure you all remember when hairdressing appointments, it was announced we were able to get a haircut. However, they were confined to 30 minutes. And I think a lot of women, and good public health reasons, I know it, for keeping contact confined. However, at the time, a lot of women thought, am I being involved in this decision? And some of us, as you can see, just gave up. But let's move on. I want to start the conversation actually with you, Sam. What what do we mean actually by a gender lens, and why is it important in philanthropy?
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Julie and Amanda, for that wonderful start to today's session. And I'll answer your question in a moment, Catherine, but I have to start by just letting you all know that I'm joining you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And also acknowledge, I think, when we're acknowledging the great role of Indigenous leadership, that of Indigenous women's leadership. And I think this year we've seen so much of that, both through the management of health on the ground for Indigenous communities, but then at the very strong strategic level with women like Auntie Pat Anderson and Megan Davis, Professor Megan Davis, as the real advocates for the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So I just want to pay my respects to them, and also, as you have done, to the mighty, generous and wise founders of what was AWDN and is now Australians Investing in Women, and all the women on this call who've joined us, who I know have given so much to this organisation. So I hope, along with you, Catherine, and Julie and the rest of the board, that we continue to show what we can do with this remarkable organisation, with the support of such extraordinary women across the country. So to your question, though, and I think that term gender lens is often a bit of a barrier. People sort of want a textbook definition. I think your example of the Invisible Women book is a good one because it goes into the specifics of that. But I guess to go to the heart of the issue, I'd like to think about two women who've recently passed this year we've lost. And one was Susan Ryan, who died far too early, only a couple of months ago. And then on the 11th of November, we lost Dame Margaret Guilfoyle, who died at the ripe old age of 94. Both these women were firsts. Dame Margaret was the first woman in a cabinet position in this country under Malcolm Fraser's government. And of course, Susan Ryan was the first Labor cabinet minister. And both said something that I think holds true for the gender lens, which is you cannot have decisions made about women without women. And those decisions that affect us within a societal context, in Susan Ryan's case, that was about taking a deep step into education. We'll hear from Jay in a moment about why childhood education is such an important matter for society and for women, but Susan Ryan was doing that very early on. But it was Margaret Guilfoyle who, when she entered the Senate as a 45-year-old back in 1971, said this, that equal participation of women in the parliament, the whole of the community life, can only lead us to a better understanding of humanity and to the fulfilment of the aspirations that we would have for a civil society. So there's the sort of general encapsulation. If I take it to the specific, it's a form of thinking about any investment, any policy, any giving that intentionally includes women as part of the analysis of why the giving, how much of the giving, and what is that giving doing. And without that intentional moment of asking, what is this gift, this money, this policy effect on women doing, without that intentional question, back to your point about the fact that we get left out, we go to the general, and the general is that we look at society through the lens of men who were in decision-making powers, who were the majority of workers for many years, and who held that power that women were not able to access. So it's a very simple call to action, which is every time we think about giving, we think about a policy, we think about a corporate design of an organisation, whatever it is, to actively take in the impact on women and girls. And I'll give two quick examples. One's a very big one. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation thought they were doing that very, very well, one of the biggest philanthropists on the globe. And it wasn't until 2019, in their letter to the world, that both Bill and Melinda Gates said that they had not realised until 2019 that they did not measure the data of how their giving was affecting women and girls. And they actually spoke about in that message, their annual list talked a lot about what they'd given to women's programs specifically, but they had never done the analysis of what their general giving was doing as an impact on women. And so if the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation took till 2019 to actually understand how the gender lens works, you can see how much time we've lost. My own experience is that, I guess the most prosaic was joining the AFL Commission in 2005 as the first woman to actually sit in the governance of Australia's most loved football game, the Australian Rules football. And I knew then that group of men had been looking at the investment in women through the lens of women as simply as supporters and as mothers of players, and had never thought about women and the impact of the game on women who wanted to play and be economic participants in that industry. And so if you don't apply the gender lens in a sporting context, you don't get to the Australian Football League's women's competition. You don't get AFLW, because that wouldn't have happened without an intentional look at how to include women in the policy process and investment that system was making. That was sport. And you see that across every organisation where women arrive into boards and positions of authority and start to demand that the giving and the organisational structures and cultures have an intentional look at how does this affect women and girls. So I'll leave it there, Catherine, but it's not such a big step. It's a simple step, but so few do it. And so many people feel they have done it by having a women's giving program or a women's donation program, and in fact miss the obvious, which is how we actually look to how all of our giving affects women and girls across our society.
Thank you, Sam, for an excellent platform to continue on with the discussion. Jay, can I turn to you? I just wonder if you could give us a little bit of background. So you're the Premier of South Australia, and now you've become the head of Thrive by 5. Tell us about that transition and what, in fact, attracted you to taking up that role.
Well, thanks, Catherine. And I'll just begin by saying that I come to you from the land of the Wadjuk people in the Noongar Nation. And congratulations on the new identity. It says what you do, which I think is always a good idea for a brand. So congratulations on that. And thanks for an opportunity to speak to this wonderful group that you've assembled. Well, for me, back in 2004, when I was a minister in the South Australian government, I was given responsibility for some children's portfolios and really had children type portfolios from that time all the way through to the end of my time as Premier. And I had some wonderful opportunities during that period. The first was to have 2 little girls, which opened my eyes to the whole sort of wonder of early childhood. But at the same time, I also had 2 thinkers in residence came to South Australia. One was a gentleman called Fraser Mustard, who was a neuroscientist who spoke about the critical importance of the first 5 years of life and how a child's brain develops and how that's shaped by essentially experiences, so experience-based brain development, and the way that really sets up the trajectory for well-being, learning, health, all of the things that really set us up for happy, healthy lives are established in, or critically established in, those first 5 years. So that was powerful. And then the other, almost from a philosophical perspective, but the same idea, for the last 70 years, a small town in Italy, Reggio Emilia, has been pioneering what is regarded as probably one of the most progressive pedagogies around early learning. And it all started with women. Women rebuilt the city out of the ruins, literally brick by brick. So the ruins of post-war Italy, they took the broken down buildings, and there was this argument in the town about what the future would hold. And some of the men wanted to build big monuments and the women wanted to build schools, and the women won. And they created Reggio Emilia. And we've had the benefit of that very deep relationship with them, and it's been an inspiration for me, and I've tried to carry it forward in my work in politics and now post-politics.
So what is the aim of Thrive by 5? Explain a little bit, if you would, to us of what the goals, what your goals are and why it was set up.
To create a high-quality, universally accessible early learning system for this country. That's the campaign goal. The mechanism is to put early childhood on the national political agenda. And to do that, we have to run a campaign. And lots of people have been talking about this for a lot of years. What they haven't necessarily had, though, is a concerted campaign which has been well-resourced, which can bring together the many voices into one message. And that's what we're trying to do, trying to create pressure on the political process. There's no natural reason why early childhood should be on the national political agenda, and our job is to put it there through powerful advocacy. And what I've found really powerful in just the as we're trying to mobilise the arguments in favour of this, the most significant motive force behind this debate has been women. Because they're directly affected, because obviously even though it shouldn't necessarily be this way, but the overwhelming burden of responsibility for the well-being of children and the care and protection of children falls to women. And there are some other critically important economic issues associated with it as well. The cost of living pressures fall very heavily on women, especially single women households, as we saw yesterday in the Hilda report that was published. And the structure of our system of care means that women are punished if they want to work more than part-time if they indeed have children. So there are massive gender issues associated with this, and there's a lot of women that look at their pay packets or look at their superannuation balances and can see a lifetime of discrimination, and a big part of that discrimination is the way in which we organise our early learning childcare system.
Indeed, and we are a long way. Of course, it isn't a single-sex endeavour to raise a child, but of course we are one of the countries in the world that has the highest rate of part-time workers who are predominantly women. We know that women are overrepresented in insecure jobs. We know the knock-on effects of this are really profound. Sam, how important are they, and why does that period when your children are small, for many women, have these extraordinarily long-term effects? And can you outline perhaps to us? I mean, some of them fairly well known, but it is a string of them, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a string of them, and they're compounding, and they have an effect on a woman's life over the entire course of her life. And we know that from all of the data, and you've written extensively on this, Catherine. I think a point that Jay made, which we shouldn't lose, is Jay's work and the coalition that's been built around Thrive by 5 starts with that notion of early education for the child and putting the child at the centre of this grand mission, which we must pursue and we must achieve. And we know that we've got the public education system for children from 5. This should be no different for the sort of 0 to 5, for cognitive reasons, for equality of all children who start school, and to stop the terrible numbers we see in this country of at least 1 in 5 children not having the cognitive and developmental skills when they start school because of that lack of early childhood education. And where that hits with the women's story is that women know that as they've had to stay at home generally as the partner that's had to give up work and do the maternal type raising of children, and that word has infused itself into our system around maternity leave and the maternal nature of early childhood care. We've seen those women have to give up all sorts of opportunities for themselves. They often do that quite willingly, but in many cases, they give up on advancement in their career, opportunities to keep developing, the continuing balance of their superannuation account, and their ability to retain the growth in their own income over time that sees them progress at the same level as their men counterparts in the business and they're part of. And they never get ahead of that. And we know, as Jay has already said, that the way the system has worked to try to fund some form of early childhood care as opposed to education is that it gets to be a very costly matter and very difficult matter, and often families will just add up the numbers and say, well, one of us can't work and to pay for this, so one will stay home. And generally, not always, but generally that has been the woman, and women's work has then been consigned to the notion of care and children's care and house care, all unpaid work, all unmeasured by our society. Until we get into a system like COVID, where, as you've already pointed out, we've seen the extraordinary, incredible effect that's had on women who are already disadvantaged by that system, further disadvantaged by the additional care and education that had to be done from home, and the number of women who had to give up work, often precarious work, and a stitched together pattern of underemployment to get us whole, continuing to be able to thrive. So women just don't get to catch up in that system. And yet we have the highest educated population of women in the world. So we do incredibly well on university educated and trades educated women. And then we squander that by having a system that acts in a very gender focused and gender biased way to keep women out of the workforce. Mm-hmm. So one of the other reasons that Jay's work is so important is if we can solve for the child's benefit and fix a very big problem in our system of education, we are solving for a really big, profound societal issue of women's participation in the economy. And what I guess concerns me and perplexes me is it would be one of the simplest things to do from an economic investment and supercharging of a post-COVID world to have budgets that identify this, particularly from the workplace and workforce participation rates, that it would encourage in women and allow women to get back into the careers and the income, the superannuation savings, and participate across the entirety of their careers. That would take us to getting rid of the word maternal or even paternal and talk about parental leave and caring leave, which can be shared by everybody. So those families and those couples who actually would like to spend more time with their children and can make an equal choice that perhaps it's the man in the family that stays home for a while and does some of that caring, and that becomes the norm as opposed to this being women's work. It's parents' work, and it's funded in a way that ensures that we get the greatest participation of an underutilised economic asset, and that's women. And so, you know, I could tell you all the data, but I think most of the people on this call know this, that there is just a perpetual and persistent and pernicious discrimination against women that's inherent in the way the system currently works. And we need
very embedded male breadwinner model. Again, one of the highest in the OECD. I keep saying that, but unfortunately we do have a couple of firsts there, which are rather unfortunate. I wonder if you can both, maybe we can bring this back to our audience's role in this. So if we're looking at funders and the philanthropic community, some of this clearly Jay's outlined the campaign to get this on the political agenda. What role can funders play, and the people listening today, what can they do around this, along with comprehending and applying the gender lens?
I'll start and then hand to Jay, Catherine. There's a few very simple things. First of all, have in your frame of thinking the fact that you need to assume that everything you're doing will have a different impact on women and girls. And if you don't identify it and address it, you will be part of a system that is discriminating and leaving women behind unintentionally, but because we need to be intentionally included. So as a way of thinking, it's just a case of never excluding us from the discussions about how you give. That takes you to how do you do your giving and your policy designs and your corporate investments at the table, providing a sense of the role of women in the work that you do. So the construction of your panels and the teams of people who look at giving needs to be necessarily diverse. And I'd say it's got to be the widest reach of women, not just privileged white women like me, but as many women of diversity, of colour, of people who don't have as much privilege as many of us, to actually give an insight into what that impact is going to be on women. And then be over generous, I guess, in the giving to women, and not women's causes, but the issues and policies that affect women most perversely, knowing that the impact you will have in that decision benefits the community as a whole, that men benefit when we actually take an intentional investment in the women and girls side of the equation. And to be intentional about that and talk about it and call out those where you see the gaze not being applied appropriately as a result of not applying the gender lens.
And Jay, your thoughts too. I mean, obviously, where you're sitting at the moment, and the campaign and the goal of that. What do you think you're seeing? I know you haven't been in the role for all that long. What impact can others in this community play around some of these absolutely critical issues?
Yeah, COVID has been obviously an awful scourge around the world and in this country. Although we've been blessedly spared from some of its worst impacts, I suppose. But one of the things it has done is that it's shown up how precarious this system of early childhood education and care is. And this is not for the first time. About 10 years ago, many would recall that ABC learning collapsed and the system had to be rescued then. And off the back of that, some important things happen. The quality reforms for early learning come in, and that being a good thing. But there's a long way to go. There's a lot of people who don't have access to this system, and often the very people that would most benefit from it, the parents that would most benefit from a high quality early learning system, their ability to participate in community life, not just in work, but in the fullest elements of our community. So that's locked away from many people. And of course, the children, we know that profoundly their future prospects are affected by the quality of their early experiences and the absence of negative experiences. So this is a really powerful reform. One of the things that I think has been happening, though, because COVID brought this system to the brink of collapse, the Commonwealth was forced to switch it off and actually put in this brief period of free. And a couple of things happened there. One is everybody got a sudden glimpse of what the future could look like, which was powerful. But they also, some other very interesting things happened. So SNAIC, the body that looks after early learning for Aboriginal children, reported an influx of new families into their system for the first time. And there are other anecdotal stories of new people coming in and taking advantage of these services. So we've had a glimpse of the future. We've now got early learning on the national political agenda. The last budget, which ignored essentially these issues, was largely criticised as a budget that was a bit tone deaf to the needs of women and children. So I think it sits there on the agenda, and so I think there's a real opportunity for people to get involved and to maintain that momentum, because I think we're really on the cusp of achieving something.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. And I remember Adam Fennessy, who's now running the Public Service Commission in Victoria, saying to me at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we've got a chance here to shift this as a topic into an important economic lever discussion. And unfortunately, not too long afterwards, things shifted a bit. But I agree with you. I think there is an avenue there. Now, we do have a question here.
Want to say one quick thing? Sorry, just one thing. One of the most spectacular women economists working in the world at the moment, Mariana Mazzucato, has recently published a piece that just talks about the post-COVID world tells us that capitalism is not appropriate for feminism. It's a brilliant thesis she's written. I'd encourage people to have a look at it. But her point goes to the rebuilding of capitalism that is truly inclusive and applies a gender lens. And that goes to the point that many on this call have been advocating for, which is more women in our parliaments, more women in policy design positions, more women leaders on boards in leading, and actually addressing that balance. So as part of the gender lens, we need women to have a really good crack at how we reform a capitalism that is inclusive and grows and is a better capitalism, or the philanthropic community can do a really big power of work.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think has been really encouraging is the number of extraordinary women economists. I may be slightly biased in that I have a daughter who's now an economist and is in part of the Women in Economics Network, but so many of them stepping up around the budget analysis, around action, around COVID recovery. And gosh, that's different from a few years ago. I can just remember when I was reporting, those women are sensational and they're doing a brilliant job. So the question that we do have, what do you, and address to both of you, what do you think it will take to get more politicians interested in taking a gender lens to policy making and budget setting? The $64 million question. Jay, why not to you first?
Well, survival, is always a powerful sort of motivation for politicians. Our research shows that this is about 2/3 of people support this idea. And interestingly, it doesn't wildly vary between progressives, conservatives, men, women, young, old. It's at a bit of difference in the ways you'd imagine, but it's a very powerful level of support. And unless you're a complete ideologue, most politicians, vote for survival over oblivion. So if we can actually powerfully advocate for this, they will be forced into it. And for me, the last great social reform was the National Disability Insurance Scheme. That was, and we managed to get 150 federal MPs to all sign up to that. So it is possible, and it was a universal reform in the same nature. This is different, probably arguably more complex, but it was a powerful campaign. It was based on a universal platform. The campaign slogan, if you recall, was "Every Australian Counts," and it mobilised quite a disparate sector and got them all to sing the same song. And that's really what our objective is here: to get many voices, one message. And campaign for change. And I really think that this has a real prospects of success. And I think any politician that stands in the way of it is likely to get run over.
Yeah. Good point. And I should just add that we have the wonderful Licia Heath from Women for Election in the audience, who's doing a great job. And I think Licia has been finding there has been real appetite from women to put their hands up to enter Parliament. So despite all the discussion that's been happening, and particularly in recent weeks. I think women are actually also wanting to step in. Sam, your thoughts on that?
I'll refer firstly about Jay's sense of it's about survival. So we've got to make this a survival issue for our political class. And that means grassroots campaigning. It means petitioning your MPs and senators and taking up the list of things that really matter from a policy point of view. And thinking about the fact that we've got a federal budget coming in May, again, this is a time to really mobilise and get behind the Thrive by 5 campaign and all of the partners in that to say this is a national priority and it matters to electors, and that people might make a decision at the ballot box about whether the appropriate management of childcare, women's issues and gender equality may become a determinant about how we vote. That also means, now that you've reminded me about Alyssa being on the call, back in the 200 women or so that Alyssa wants to train and make a donation to get those women trained to feel confident to enter the political system, because we need them as our representatives. But if I go back to the work of Susan Ryan and Anne Summers and with the Sex Discrimination Act and the anti-discrimination legislation in our time, and I think about the work that Kate Jenkins is doing in completely mobilising leadership around the end of sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace, then we've this whole debate to a new level to say these things matter to us as a prosperous, engaged, contemporary society that values every citizen. And these issues about women can become determinative of great leadership. And so, the corporate world knows what the price is that you pay if you get this wrong. You lose chief executives, you lose chairs, you lose investor confidence. And we should see more of that in the political context in recent times. But that will come, I think, as we keep enforcing the fact that our expectations about removing discriminations, barriers for women, and applying a gender lens to our giving to make us a better society is something we should all be prepared to advocate for, men and women, and ultimately understand it's the best path, the most efficient path to a prosperous Australia that can then take care of a lot of other issues that are going to really beset us in the economy that lies ahead.
Yeah. And Jay, philanthropists therefore have a role, don't they, as being actually out in front in many ways, because that's basically what Thrive by 5 is doing. You're setting out an agenda and asking government to follow. But that's a really important role for, again, for funders and philanthropists.
Yeah, I mean, we've set up it's really an umbrella. We're not sort of at the front, we're just really sort of trying to provide the framework for a whole range of organisations that have really been doing this for a long time. So it's a very broad coalition of people that have come together. We're just trying to provide, if you like, the engine room to actually make this get grip on the political process. And it's just been extraordinary, the amount of momentum that's been built. A really powerful source, actually, of action has been female journalists, often women who are actually struggling with these very issues themselves, and they're living it, and they're getting very sort of motivated, and they're producing great stories. But really, anybody who's listening to this, anybody that knows anybody that is interested in this issue, we really encourage them to go to the campaign website, thriveby5.org.au, and you can participate in lots of different ways. There's just mobilising, if you like, the networks in these ways. There's contributing to the policy question, because this is, while we've got a campaign goal, there's a very complex equation about how we get from the current system we've got to the system we imagine. This is not trivial public policy, it's very complex. And then the third thing is people that want to raise their voice publicly, whether it's producing op-ed pieces, telling us about their own experiences, people that are comfortable in front of cameras or on radio. We're really looking for the amount of content that we can gather that drives this campaign. It will be very powerful.
Yeah, and as you say, every single person on this call today has a role to play in that. Now, Julie, is there anything else that you would like to cover in this part? I'm conscious that we've only got a few minutes until we finish up. Would you?
Can I just say so much? I'd just like another hour for you to keep going.
Best of the day. All right.
But thank you. And please, I encourage you all to follow that call to action by Jay and by Lisha, and the one I'm about to give you from Australians Investing in Women. But can I thank you, Catherine, Jay and Sam, so much. Happily, we're recording today, and There are so many pearls of wisdom and really beautiful insights and light bulb moments I think we can share in different ways. So thank you very much. What remains is for me to come back to sharing my screen and take you on a little tour of our website. And it will be a very brief tour because our website is very aptly working in with our theme of evolution. It is an evolving process and a bit of a work in progress. And for today, we've gone for a very pared back model because we've got a lot of resources and information that we want to update and bring across our new brand. But we really want to get people used to our new website and the sort of new audience we're trying to reach. And I want to start by just highlighting again some of our fantastic ambassadors. There's no order of preference here. It will randomly shuffle them every time you come onto this page. But I do want to go to our co-founder, Eve Marlab, who specifically asked me to read out that her final comment that says Australians investing in women is an exciting and timely evolution of the Australian Women Donors Network, and I'm confident of and will delight in its continuing impact and success. So thank you, Eve, very much, and to each of these amazing people who really put their funding where their heart is and are really helping us do the advocacy and the education that we're doing. So I invite you to come along and have a look at the new website. We really want to be known as Australians Investing in Women, but it's a very long domain. So we are aiiw.org.au, and all of our contact from here will of course follow. If you're emailing me, it'll go directly on, but here you can start your journey if you're new to the mission and download a toolkit, download a guide, sign up for a board presentation or a workshop. And I just need to quickly toggle back. I'm going to go to really just invite you to have a good shop around this website. But before I leave, I do want to go back. We've got some actions that we want you to take. And I'm going to, in order to do that, I'm just going to show you a few little parts of our new website. We've got projects if you're looking for where to invest. And I think, Lisha, you're on that project and a number of others. But if I can very briefly return to sorry, Joyce. I just need to briefly return to our previous slide presentation. I'm going to rely on my expert here. So I want to, before we go, because there is so much work in this, I really do want to acknowledge again as we close our sponsors, and just to particularly thank the Collier Charitable Trust, who was a foundation that started really with 3 sisters and who have given us the funding to do this website. So please take a screenshot here or make some notes. We really want you to take action. We want you to engage with us on social media, spread the word about our new organisation. And we want you to make sure that we've seen an awful lot of very good intentions and a lot of awareness and a lot of love. But what we need is to turn that love into action. And so we really need these formal processes put into all philanthropic practice at board level, at grant making level, etc. And the other thing, if there's just one simple thing, I want to repeat what Sam referred to before. If there is one simple thing that each of us can do every day, it is quite literally to ask, so what is the impact of this on women? So what does it mean for women? How might it be different for women? How can we make sure this serves women equally? It's just a simple question. I can see Eve Marlab smiling broadly. It's her favourite question. And the other thing she's always said is if you treat unequal people equally, they'll still be unequal. And sometimes the gender lens on women means equitable funding, and sometimes that means more funding. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us. I really want to thank you for your very warm and beautiful comments. We feel really strongly that's the right brand, but it's so nice to have that affirmed. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Catherine. Please join us. Have a look at the website. Give us some feedback. Write to us. It is very much the lean version, and over the next few weeks, we'll be building it out with our updated resources and new resources in the new year. So thank you again. We're just over 12 o'clock. Feel free to stay on and have a chat if you'd like to, but otherwise I'm going to wish you well and encourage you to go forth and empower your giving for a fairer future. Thanks, everyone.